Good afternoon. I started laughing because I was thinking I took the day off. So yesterday was my birthday, and my mother always would buy me a small wedding cake, white, you know, and so my sister was coming to visit, and so she wanted to do that for me. And my son drove a number of places. And he called me and he said he couldn't find a wedding cake, but how about ding dongs? So every time I think of the ding dongs, and so that's what we had for my birthday cake was ding dongs. And maybe that just is going to become my new thing. But yeah, it made me laugh thinking about. So yesterday I didn't do any genealogy. I just celebrated, and actually I've extended my birthday now many days with visits and mail and company and phone calls and stuff. So thank you, everybody, very much. So one of the things before I really take off on the family that I'm going to continue on is when we set up the family branching. I was talking to you a little bit about it the other day. The words the keywords we came up with was connections, conversations, and community. Now, I think that that was my desire. That was my direction that I was planning on going with my videos. And then the other thing off to the side was, and anytime I've ever went to any, genealogy meetings or whatever, anytime I was around groups of genealogists, they always say, it's too bad we didn't ask more questions. It's too bad we didn't ask our grandparents or if we had a great grandparent or do some of this research when we were younger. So we had people to ask. And but I want to share this with you what really happened with the last video. So the last video was about my dad and then his dad. And I thought all the research I had done and family gathering of the records and I mean I go and just doing ancestry, there is a certain amount of research and searching through the records that are pretty much black and white. And so I feel really um, what I want is I want that liver feeling about these that they're really people and they really lived and worked and had sorrows and had happiness um and so I kind of went back to thinking about, oh wow, if like I only would ask more questions. And what was interesting, so um, as soon as I pushed the button and published that video, the phone rang, and it was my sister. And because she's my older sister, she had remembered some things I didn't know that I added actually to that video. But then she came to visit me for my birthday a couple days ago, and she said, "Oh, the one thing I wanted to tell you was our dad, John McDonald, did not come home in a shoebox. It was a cigar box." And I thought, that's kind of interesting. I wasn't thinking as much about like siblings, especially. And I'm the middle child. And so she's older. She remembers more. And then my brother's younger. But then he called me right after that. And so we had a talk. And so when it came down to the conversations, the connections, I felt like I was got an additional birthday present by coming closer and closer to both of my siblings and being able to, you know, my brother when he's not hunting or fishing or busy, do polishes rocks and rock collects and stuff. He has a lot of hobbies. He goes in and he actually works the genealogy through ancestry also. And my sister doesn't, but she has the pictures and more knowledge. And so we put it all together. So just as a FYI, you might think about that because it was kind of a surprise to me and it really helped um, make a lot of things make more sense. What was happening back then. And so today we're going to talk about Alexander. Alexander Angus. Now, Angus was the other name. Last video, I kind of ended it with, there's a lots of John McDonald's, um, Alexander McDonald's, Angus McDonald's. They just kind of very Scottish named these people. So And again, as I mentioned in the last video, they came down from French Canadian, where they had been living, and so it's very interesting. I think that a lot of people can actually jump over to Scotland maybe faster than we're going to be able to do that, because it's hard to read some of the French census reports, and they do different things. As far as what they gather. So Alexander Angus, he was born in Glengarry, in that Ontario, and that was in 1862. So when I started, and I had already done the genealogy resource part of it and put the facts in. But as I started doing additional, and then I took my hints and I started realizing, so I made kind of a list of all the different hints. I think there's 7 of them. And so as the information started to come up, it kind of guided me into other areas to understand the family better. Now, this is some of them are very, very happy, and my videos and reporting on. I think one of the funnest ones was when Lorenzo D. Bates was waiting for his wife to come in from Pennsylvania, and they got married that afternoon and went back to the farm and had kids. And but this particular family, I never know where the story's going to jump out at me when I start. I mean, I have a lot of records. I have my records back a long ways, and feel good about that. But when I actually start dissecting it and putting who's who and what's what, and looking to see how old they were, how many kids they had, or what kind of job they had, um, then I find the story. And this is a sad story. This is a story that I would not have uh, any mother or father to have to go through what Alexander and he married Mary. So what showed up was, so they had 7 kids, and I'll give you the general and then I'll give you specifics. But they had 7 kids, and 5 of them ended up dying, or multiple different things happened to them, that they were not alive when the parents were still alive. So this mother and father had 7 kids, and out of those 7 kids, they only really ended up with 2 that were still alive when they were alive. And then I thought maybe there would be a theme to that. Maybe they were infants. There was no infants that died. Maybe there was, like right now, the pandemic. Maybe it was something like that that just kind of wiped out a family. We've had the Rocky Mountain fever, tick bite in the Elnut family in Montana. So I was prepared. I had no idea in my mind, though, what I might find. So Alexander was a farmer, and so he did a lot of farming. And then when they came out to the state of Washington about in 1930. So he was born in 1862, and they showed up on the census report, but it was in Michigan. Now, I still don't know what actually enticed them to move. I've been doing a lot of research recently on homesteading laws and rules, and who can homestead and who can't homestead, and I think the United States basically had it pretty well organized before Canada even opened up their side. But I think sometimes the people that were on the East Coast coming in as immigrants from multiple countries all over, um, they were able to take advantage. And then also, if you were in the military, you served in the Civil War or most of the wars, there was an option for you to actually be able to homestead. And the homestead, I'll do another report, another video on the details, but it was a lot of land you could take. But then there were certain things you had to do, and then you had to live on it for 5 years. You had to make addition additions like fences in a house, and you basically had government regulation on it. But it was a lot of land, and so the land could have been divided up between family members. And I've seen a little bit of that, but I find that some people say, "Oh yeah, they homesteaded," but they really weren't homesteading. They only it was part of probably the talk of the generation or something like that, that they would say they were homesteading, because it wasn't just like a house on a parcel of land. It was much more. It was, and there was a lot of rules and regs that you had to, although, in some of these remote areas, I don't know how they'd come out and check. I know that there are people still homesteading, and so that's why I'm kind of interested to see um, what the rules are of right now. So that was interesting to me. So as far as the military, that's where I saw it, and you could actually kind of follow when they signed up for the draft, when they actually went to war, when they came back, and then they chose to do homesteading, and they kind of jumped from like one state to the next state. They didn't drive their buggies and whatever transportation they had by then, maybe a train, and go across many states. They just moved to the next state over where they could, get a little bit more land or a little bit better climate or something like that. So anyway, it'll be a whole nother probably video because I'm pretty intrigued by it. So he was a farmer in the beginning, and it wasn't until he actually, landed in a Rainbow Edition in Kelso that, and it's a little bit more difficult. I have not been able to find out which mill he worked at or how long he worked, but he did live to be 85 years old, and we have pictures of him. And he was kind of a short man, similar to my dad, and he dressed all in black and a black hat, and he had a black and white dog. And my sister remembers him. My sister remembers talking to him, and a nickname that he would call her, but I have no memory. I think he died, seemed like it was he died in July, and then I was born in October. So, I didn't get to meet him at all. Um, and then both him and Mary are buried up in a close small, was a Catholic cemetery, and it was one of the oldest Catholic churches in the state of Washington at the time. And this particular family, and as I go, there's going to be a lot more Catholic connection, more than what I've went through, in the other videos. Okay, so there were 7 children. So the number one children's name was Florence. So Florence married a man. He was actually a veterinarian, Mr. Brown, and she married him, and they had no kids. And I don't know to this point what why they didn't have kids, but as he moved around. Now he was a veterinarian for large animals, so he wasn't like a dog, cat. He was like cows, horses, and it seemed like he would move quite often into these areas where he wouldn't have to travel so much, both in Washington and in Oregon. But so, and Mary, she died when she was 69, which is, when you think about what the death rate norm was back then, that's a decent time. I mean, it wasn't like she died early, um, unless she died of sadness. So Florence was number one. She had no heirs, but they adopted 3 children. So I kind of followed the children along, but my idea when I'm doing genealogy is, still the true DNA match people to our family, and that's kind of, I kind of work it up, but they actually adopted. So you check her off the list, got no heirs on her, but these 3 adopted kids. Now, Florence did live to be 80 years old. So that was, good. So the next child, her name shows up both as Jessie and Justine, both of them, and they go back and forth. She was a nurse at the age of 19, had no heirs, did not get married, and she died. And she died of a certain kind of pneumonia. And almost when I was reading the chart notes on it, it was pneumonia, but it was almost like there's many different kinds of pneumonia, especially virus pneumonia or bacterial. And but it was almost like a pandemic type thing, almost a feeling like respiratory, it's like everything that we or I for sure have been taking booster shots for and to try to keep from getting the COVID. So then she's off the list. So then my grandfather, John Kenneth, was born. So he's the other one that he lived to be 70 years old. But again, he was so young when he didn't really have a life as far as a life in an institution for the whole part of your whole life between. Then sometimes when you're in an institution, it may keep you live longer because they're taking care of your food and they're taking care of you and you, but it's not, there's no life. So even though that he lived one more year than his mother, and then his father outlived him. He's kind of hardly, can hardly count him now. And then he only had my dad, so there was just one heir at that point. So then the next one, let's see, it's one, two, three, number four is Angus. Angus William. He had no heirs, never got married, died at the age of 14. In the 1900 census report, it said he died of typhoid fever. When I first saw that, for me, I don't know, I thought it was going, he had to go to Africa to die of the typhoid fever, and or what it meant. But I did research it because it was another one of those that, was it something like the tick bites or something? But so what it ended up being was most of the time when a person gets typhoid fever, it's from contaminated food, salmonella. So sometimes you may in your records you might find that the person died of something different. And it even mentioned peritonitis, which is the inflammation of the appendix. And so he was in the hospital for quite a while. So it was almost like maybe that was part of where it came from, was when he had his burst of his appendix, that somehow he got involved. I don't know. Salmonella and contaminated food is what they really think causes typhoid fever. My God, if anybody wants to send me a comment about that too, if they had any notion or idea, like I did, what typhoid fever was and wasn't. Now, I remember kind of when we went on the historical military tour of Vietnam, I think there was a lot of shots and a lot of vaccines. And especially like when the guys were fighting the war over there, they just, loaded them up with all kinds of vaccines so they wouldn't be, getting that. So, and he was 14. So see, it's not infants. So then the next is Charles Percy. And Charles, he moved out with the parents. In fact, he even lived near them for a while. And then he was a butcher and he had no heirs, no kids. And he was down in Cathlama, which wasn't that far. So he kind of was around, for a lot of that time. But at the same time, he died at 42 years old. So he was still way younger than his mother and his father. And his thing was there was, when he was sleeping, the house caught on fire and burned him to death. Yeah. And so then there was James A. And one of the things that my dad evidently told my sister over and over and over again when he was still, lucid, was that you got to find James. So James was in this, he came out west, but then he decided to go back to Michigan, and then zero information. Nobody knew what happened to James, other than somebody thought he lost his leg, um, as he was, they used to ride the rails for transportation. And so, and there was a lot of bad accidents that happened. If you slipped and slided and, went under the rail of a train, you could have lost your leg. But my sister has always said that that's the one thing she felt like she was hoping that we could uncover and find James. Now, and my brother has looked for James a long time in Ancestry, and I haven't started any specific looking for him, but he's lost. Because my theme and the story behind this family was just so much about the what must have their family been like, for the mom and the dads to, lose a son completely, one burn up in the fire, two die of things when they were in their teens. Um, yeah, just, I don't know. To me, I have two boys, and I mean, I think it would be terrible, terrible for a family to, when a lot of times you'll see like a mother will have a stillborn or something like that, and they take that to their grave. I mean, they really um are affected by it. But to have that many kids out of your whole family, I think that would be even more difficult. So the last one is Orban. And Orban's was, you know, he died when he was 28 years old, but he did get married and he had three little girls. And they are DNA connected little girls, and we have had contact with them. So he died of the Burgess disease. Now, for a long, I mean, I hadn't run across that in when I was working in the hospital or working for doctors, but it's a form where it has to do with your arteries and your veins, and especially in your hands and your feet, and somehow it makes them almost close down, and so you get like the blood stops running to those areas. And then, like if it was in your finger, then your finger would turn gray, and then it would turn black, and then gangrene would set in. And so a lot of these people in that process, before they actually died, they were having limbs, hands, fingers, removed. Now, he was 28 years old. I mean, just a young man. And he actually died at Soap Lake. Now, so when you know me, I have to go in and figure out, I have to dig deep and, um, because I want to know. And Soap Lake is in about middle of the state of Washington. And there's several little lakes along there, and they all have unusual quantities of various minerals in them. So back in those days, like, and that would have been, he died in 29. So back in those days, oh boy, and that's really close to the um, Depression years. So it must have been before that when he started going to this place. But anyway, they had some sanitariums out there. They had, all kinds of, and they're trying to build it up again right now when I did this research, because there is people wanting more of a natural healing type, and they believe in trying just about anything. And I think this might have been what he was doing, is trying everything, because he would go out there and soak in these lakes, and the mud even has just these out. I mean, worldwide, there's very few other lakes in the world that have the combination. Very, very salt, just kind of like the Salt Lakes, but not just salt. It was all the different minerals, and it would seep down into this mud, so you could have like a mud bath, and somehow people believed. And even in the article um, that I was researching, it actually mentioned that Burgess is one of those diseases that um, people have successfully been able to be cured at those lakes, Soap Lake. And the soap part of it is that when the wind blows, it blows, and it's like, looks like a bathtub almost, and there was like pockets of bubbles on the side, and it's from these chemicals. The only other thing about it that was interesting to me was that when I was researching it, they talked about that they felt like it had something to do with people who used tobacco. Now, it wasn't like they were talking necessarily about what you think about, people getting lung cancer or something like for smoking for a long time, but there was something in the process of the tobacco, how it was treated before it was even put out there to the public. That's the one thing. And then the only other semi-controversial, but they, go back and forth about it, is that it was genetic. But now sometimes when I hear genetic, it's like, I don't, if I see somebody else in the family, I kind of question the genetic aspect of, because there's a lot of things that are in the families that would look like it's genetic, but so many of them, if you live to be 80 or 90 years old, your body would just normally have some of these problems that, and so it's not as detrimental if you're in your 20s or 30s and everybody in your family's had breast cancer, and and they do your DNA and they find that connection. So, I like to laugh and I like to enjoy stuff. This was a really hard one for me. This one, it was, and before I put it together, I can't stress enough, when you actually add some of those hints, like where they worked and how old were they when they died? Do you know what the diagnosis was? And um, yeah, there's just, so I feel like it's a real, more of a picture of this family and the sorrow that they must have had. It must have been very, very difficult for the parents and the siblings that had to go through this. Anyway, so my one girlfriend who's a little bit younger than I am, and so we always tease each other, every single birthday. But so she sent mine, and it was like 76 trombones at the big parade. And so I'm going to conclude this video on that note, and I hope that it affects you the same way, because ever since I got that message from her, I've been singing 76 trombones. Let the big parade. Anyway. Hope you have a great rest of your afternoon. And, if you want, like my video and subscribe, that would be great. And then my brother said he was having trouble with the content comments. And so, if anybody wants to try sending me a comment, and then so I can check and see, as to make sure we have it all set up at this end. Anyway, bye.